I became aware of the industry's want for training pretty quickly. When I posted those videos and sent them out to my team, and then all of a sudden there's 1,000 people that watch my video. Where did all these people come from?
Yeah.
I reached out to my guys and I'm like, did you watch my video like 100 times each? And they were like, no, I just watched it like 1 or 2 times.
Yeah.
And so there was this support from the community to want to know more. At the time, when I went to school for audio, there was this hesitation from people in the industry to teach the younger generation and teach others. And there's some people still believe this today. It's that they believe that if I teach another person how to do this, they're going to come after my job. And unfortunately, it's just such a bad example of the way that we should be approaching the industry. Because if I can teach another person how to do something, that opens me up to be able to do the things that are more technical, that are harder, that you have to have more experience for, that they wouldn't be able to do. At the time, I was just looking at this mixer, knowing that my team needed to learn stuff, and then finding out that there's all these other people that want to learn this mixer. And I was just like, well, I'll keep going.
Drew Brashler, welcome to the Churchfront Worship and Tech podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me.
It's awesome to have you, man. Longtime fan of the channel and the work that you've done for the church and the audio industry on YouTube. And just really excited for our conversation today, get to know you a little bit better, and would love for our audience, if they don't know who you are from the YouTube environment, would love for you to introduce yourself, tell them who you are, what you do, and what you're up to these days.
Yeah, man. Well, I'm Drew Brashler. I'm an audio engineer. Worked in a bunch of different mega churches throughout the years, and now I have decided to step away from working on staff at a church. That way I can go and help other churches. So I do a lot of consulting, and it's one of my favorite things is just helping train teams. And I truly believe that God has me in this spot where I can take these really complicated things and teach them in an easy way that a lot of people can understand. And the coolest thing is, the Behringer X32 happens to be like the bread and butter of my YouTube channel. And there's a lot of churches all around the world that have that. And so it's really cool that when I go and record a video teaching about the Behringer X32, just that the mass amount of people that can actually see that. And if we can improve our audio in our churches, we are removing distractions. And those distractions is something that can take a brand new person that's coming to your church and just like completely remove their attention and maybe not come back the next time. And so, obviously every distraction isn't that big of an issue. A lot of people have a lot of grace when it comes to some distractions and whatnot. But if we all come to that idea when we're mixing, is like, my job is to remove distractions. So if something's bright, if something's dark, like, we're just trying to remove those things so that we can have a better experience for our audience and our congregation. But that was a little side tangent. But man, I live in Kentucky. I got 3 kids. They're all teenagers. We have 18 chickens.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a lot of chickens, man. We just got them. Yeah, it's funny because when you buy them, Tractor Supply, there's a little plug. When you buy the chickens, they always say purchase 25% more chickens than you expect to live. And none of them have passed away. We have all 18 chickens. So we're going to have a lot of eggs. So if any of you guys need some eggs, hit me up. But man, I've been recording videos on the Behringer X32, putting them on my YouTube channel. And that all started when I was at this church. It was called Northridge Community Church. It was way back in the day. And we purchased 2 of the first X32s. And at the time, Behringer had this deal with Guitar Center that they would push all the units through Guitar Center first. And so I called up Guitar Center and was like, "Hey, I want the first two." So we ended up getting some of the first X32s and got them to my church. And man, we had this gigantic Allen and Heath like 48 channel console, and that thing must have weighed like 300 pounds.
Yeah.
And we had all the outboard geared on the side. And so here we are removing this gigantic board and putting in this tiny little X32. I mean, it in comparison, you could put like almost two and a half X32s side by side to equate to the size of this 48 channel board. And at the time, I was like, well, I have a volunteer staff of 5 people. I'm part time. And so, how am I going to teach them how to use this thing? So, I'm like, well, we just bought this new camera for recording our sermons in service. Maybe I'll just point that at the board and just use that. So, I decided that. And so, I started recording with that. And then I was like, well, wait, how am I going to share these files with my team of 5? Well, YouTube would be a perfect spot. And so God clearly had a way different plan. As I'm probably going to I'm hoping that I'll hit 100,000 this year of
Heck
subscribers.
yeah.
But yeah, I think I'm at 89,000. And I'm just so grateful for the community and the interest that there is on the board and the support that everyone has for me just making these videos.
It's incredible to kind of watch back. I mean, yeah, you've been producing faithfully these resources, and I love that it kind of started with a heart to serve your church and your team. You weren't looking to become the next Mr. Beast, but you were looking just to resource your crew. And man, what was I want to go back a little bit to like what even your story with audio is. So you've been on staff at a church with kind of in their audio department. But what got you into audio? What was the early days for Drew like when you started mixing or learning about audio?
Yeah, this is a plug for my dad.
Come on.
My dad was the audio engineer at our church out of the box, and I call it a church out of the box because we drove a trailer into a middle school, theater,
Yeah.
and loaded everything in, set it all up, and did the service and packed it all back away in the trailer and drove away. And for those people that are listening on this podcast that are doing this week to week, thank you so much for everything that you're doing for your church in that case. Like that is so much work. That is, but also there is so much that you can learn from setting up a PA every single week with troubleshooting and figuring out how to do things really quickly. So if you've never done it before, find a church and just
Yeah.
go volunteer for a couple weeks and just, you'll learn a lot. So I was the age of like 6 or 7, and this was back in the time that we had flannelgrams for church, which if the listeners don't know what flannelgrams are, basically, you can think of it as kind of like clip art or just like emojis, but they're made of fabric, and they would have a big sheet of fabric, maybe like 2 feet by 2 feet, and they would stick this fabric on this sheet and it would just stick there. And it like as a kid, you were like, whoa, that's magical. How does that work? And so anyway, go search it up if you've never heard of flannelgrams. They're pretty old.
They're incredible.
So at the time that I'm like 6 and 7, I'm like, I don't want to be learning about flannelgrams. If my dad is there, like I'm wanting to go hang with him. So instead of sitting in Sunday school and learning about Jonah and the whale and all those Bible stories, I was plugging in direct boxes, turning aux knobs, plugging in speaker cables, all of that. So that's how I fell into doing sound. And then I just kind of kept going at it. And then throughout high school, I was helping at the theater that we had at our high school, and I was in a really bad punk rock band. We were pretty terrible.
Weren't all of
Um,
us at one point? Like if you have not earned your
yes.
stripes by being in a bad cover band in high school, I'm not sure you can be in
Oh yeah.
ministry or be in the tech world at all, right?
Yes, exactly. And there's if you dig deep on the internet, there's some pretty bad photos of my hair. I had these like bleach blonde Liberty spikes. It was it
Heck
was
yeah.
it was a lot, man. But I just kind of kept going with sound. And so then I went to the Conservatory of Recording Arts and Sciences, which is in Tempe, Arizona, and just kind of kept doing sound forever. And then I fell into the church world, and Worked at a bunch of different mega churches. This one in Phoenix, and then I ended up going out to California for about a year and a half. Loved that, and then out to Texas for a year and a half, and now I'm here in Kentucky,
I
where
love it.
we have 18 chickens.
Yeah. 18 chickens and a plethora of YouTube videos for sure.
Exactly,
Yep.
exactly. Lots of hard
Okay.
drives.
So once you got into the like X32 world, I want to know back in that day when you were calling up guitar centers, like what was the most exciting thing for you about the X32 when it was launched? Was it, you know, footprint? Was it feature set? Like what made you, so dedicated to be calling up these guitar centers like get Drew Brashler on your list? Like I'm the guy I need these consoles.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So the conservatory is in Arizona, and my live sound teacher, his name is Keith Morris. Awesome, awesome sound guy. And he still works at Crass today. I'm pretty sure he does, at least. Don't quote me on that, but
Sure.
I hope he is, because he's awesome. Um, I was going in to meet with Keith to ask his opinion on some PA movement that I was going to be doing in the church. We had these massive EAW, like KF650Es. They are just massive boxes, and the center hang had four of them basically, and it was so weird to have four boxes. That these are point and shoot boxes, it's not an
Mm,
array. And so there was these four things, and then there was some ones on the outer side as well. And so I was just wanting to redo the PA in that room, but not spend a lot of money. So I was reamping, because at the time, we're talking about triamp speakers. So you had different amp channels powering the different portions of your speakers. So there was one for highs, one for mids, one for lows. I was going in to meet with Keith to talk about that. And so here's all these, like, this was at the time that like the PM1D was a
oh
thing, which was
yes.
super old. M7CL,
Yeah.
all of those like super old school digital consoles. And here's, all of these massive consoles. And Keith is just freaking out about this Behringer X32. And they had a sample that Behringer sent to the school. And he was just like, Drew, you have to see this thing. I'm not going to talk to you until you see this thing. And so I looked at it, and it was like, you had gate, compression, and four band fully parametric EQ on every channel. And at the time, it's like my Allen and Heath had a low shelf, a high shelf, and then two semi-parametric EQs. So
Wow.
you could adjust the frequency, but I don't believe I could adjust the Q, so like the width of the
Yeah.
EQ. And so it was just like, and then we had all this outboard gear for getting a gate or a compressor. And so you'd have to take it out of the console into another piece of gear to get it back in the console. And so just to have that on every single channel on the board was just amazing. Also, the church at Northridge at the time had two services. One was a traditional service, and then the other was a contemporary service. So the traditional service had a choir, piano, orchestra, like the whole bit. And then we would flip it after that service, and it would then be drum set, electric guitar, bass, keys, the whole bit of a contemporary service. And so the ability of just pulling up a scene and just flipping it between traditional and contemporary was just amazing. I didn't have to turn any knobs. Like, I would just be able to load it up and then do a sound check on the channels, and then the band would be off to the races.
I cannot imagine the joy of doing that for the first time, of just being like, hey, we're not unplugging cable here. We're just gonna load up another scene and here we go.
Yeah.
We're done,
I mean,
Bing bang
back in the
boom.
day with the Allen and Heath, I had papers that you'd print off a piece of paper that basically had every single knob on every channel,
Yeah.
and you would draw with a pencil or a pen where that knob is twisted to, and that was our snapshots or our scene. So
Oh my
that's how
goodness.
you pull up settings of your next service, because you know it's just it was fun. It was
I
fun.
feel like the digital mixers, not that Behringer was the first by any means, but the leap that they took coming out, from moving to an analog workflow to a digital workflow is astronomically huge. I don't think people realize how much computing power is happening at any given time that's saving them from having to have those paper strips with the pencil markings. It's, we,
Oh,
we complain
exactly.
about, we complain about like metering colors and, little things about these digital desks. We're like, we really don't know how good we have it comparatively to what the workflow was like back in the day.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And then, I mean, the X32 also could multi-track record 32
Hmm.
channels. And I mean, when I was at school, like we had a rack gear specifically for recording.
Yeah.
And this was the time of 2-inch tape as well. So you could bring in our 2-inch tape and multi-track record to this gigantic 2-inch magnetic tape and record all your channels. But then to have that just built in to be able to plug in your computer and just record audio, it was nuts. It was nuts to me at the time that like there was that much technology in this mixer that really honestly wasn't that expensive. Because at the time I was looking at upgrading to an M7 CL for our main room, and then our secondary room was going to be an LS9. And both of those are from Yamaha. Both are great boards. There's nothing wrong with them, but the training of my team was going to be difficult because I'd have to train them on two different consoles, one for the
Right.
M7 and then one for the LS9, which is a slightly different interface. And so to be able to purchase two consoles for a fraction of the cost and be able to have identical consoles in both spaces meant that as I was training up younger, high school and college students in the side room, they could instantly be able to join the main team in the main room. And so for the listeners who are out there that are thinking of doing a board upgrade, trying to spend a little bit extra money and purchase multiple of those boards and upgrade more rooms than just the single room is always
Hmm.
a good idea, because you have to always be thinking of your volunteer team. Not every church can have a massive amount of staff. And so if you can be teaching the younger generation how to mix on a board and then allow them to be like, "Hey, you wanna come mix on Sunday in the big room with the big PA?" And, like, their eyes just light up, and that's just something that really is passionate. It's
Yeah.
it's something I'm passionate about.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a huge, I think it's a huge slept on philosophy or approach. I think people don't think big picture about longevity of their leadership pipeline, of their teams in that way. So I love that you brought that up. I'm wondering, like, even as you recap, like all the things you were excited about when the board came out, what was, what do you think, having been working with it for so long, I mean, you've got years of videos on the X32 of covering just about any nook and cranny you can. What do you think is the most slept on feature that most people either aren't aware of, they're using incorrectly, or they just maybe haven't like dove that extra step that would take it to the next level?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's kinda 2 things, and one is, the effects rack built in on the Behringer X32. There's a plugin, or plugin emulation called the Precision Limiter, and it is a limiting plugin. And what it allows you to do is add a massive amount of gain, but have the output be fairly consistent and not sound overcompressed. Now, the use for this is a live stream. And so, for all the churches that are out there that are using the Behringer X32, check out the precision limiter, because you can increase a lot of volume to get your church's stream up to what's called LUFS or LUFS. And there's a certain level that YouTube and Facebook and all of those things want to hear. And if you aren't at a consistent volume, then when worship is nice and loud, and then when your preacher comes out and then all of a sudden he's super quiet, this precision limiter is a way that it can help with that. Then the other thing I would say would be the matrix section.
Mhm.
I Most boards have a matrix section, and a matrix section is like an aux send for your main left right channel. And it allows you to take your main left right and send it to multiple places. So every church has a cry room or a mother's lounge. There's so many different names for it.
Yeah.
Foyer, or Fourier if you really want to pronounce the ER. Um, and the matrix section allows you to take your main left right and give it a varied amount of volume or EQ. So, for instance, if you're using ceiling speakers in your ceiling in the foyer, you don't want to send anything below 80 hertz because those
Right.
ceiling speakers are not going to be able to reproduce that. Or if you are, then that speaker is that poor little speaker is going to blow. And so, using the matrix section, you can tailor the EQ in that destination. And so another example of using this is you could take your main left right and send your stream output out of matrix and process it. You could give it a plug-in on the effects section, like the precision limiter, that sort of thing. So those I would say are the two ways. Those are the two things that I believe that churches are just not really utilizing, and they're such fantastic features on the X32.
Hmm. And you've covered, I mean, that was like, that was my bread and butter when I was first learning the X32 was, I think you probably had 10 or 12 videos out on the effect section. Like, I think at one point you had gone through each effect that was included in the rack. And I was like, this is gold. Cause otherwise I'm sitting here just kind of filling with knobs and not really knowing what they do. But you had a great series where you walked through that. So super helpful on that regard. I think, yeah, people can take that away. The effects rack and the matrix section of X32 is very powerful. I've heard a lot of great banging mixes off of the X32. So don't underestimate the little guy. But um, when you think about your journey into producing content more frequently, when did it shift from training resources for your church to like, oh, this YouTube is like, this is part of what I do now, because you were pumping out one a week, if not more, sometimes for the X32 stuff. So when did it kind of shift to becoming more of a, I don't know, part time side hustle, if you will?
I became aware of the industry's want for training pretty quickly. When I posted those videos and sent them out to my team, and then all of a sudden there's 1,000 people that watch my video. Where did all these people come from? I,
Yeah.
I reached out to my guys and I'm like, did you watch my video like 100 times each? And they were like, no, I just watched it like one or two times.
Yeah.
And so just there was this support from the community to want to know more.
Mm.
And at the time, when I went to school for audio, there was this hesitation from people in the industry to teach the younger generation and teach others. And there's some people still believe this today. It's that they believe that if I teach another person how to do this, they're going to come after my job. And unfortunately, it's such a bad example of the way that we should be approaching the industry. Because if I can teach another person how to do something, that opens me up to be able to do the things that are more technical, that are harder, that you have to have more experience for, that they wouldn't be able to do. At the time, I was just looking at this mixer, knowing that my team needed to learn stuff, and then finding out that there's all these other people that want to learn this mixer. And I was just like, well, I'll keep going. I love, I really love digging into things. You mentioned the effects series that I
Yeah.
had, and that was fun because I was like basically reverse engineering all these plugins. At the time, like I didn't know anyone at Behringer, so I it's not like I could just shoot over an email and be like, "Hey, what's the attack time on the dual Ultimo compressor?" So
Right.
it's like I'm using Smart from Rationale Acoustics, and I'm digging in and sending tone, sending pink noise, sending different square waves to try and test to see how these plugins are working. And there's definitely some of those effects sections that like if I'm using the X32, I'm using those on the vocals or different things because they're so useful. And so anyway, I love teaching. It's one of my big passions, and I know that the audio community can use a lot more people like me teaching different products that are out there.
Yep. Yeah. I'm glad that you shared that part of the story because I think a lot of times in this kind of consumer media culture of YouTube, we can kind of not know how much work goes into putting together a video or a training. And so you mentioned smart and sending tones and like I remember when our I worked at a school and they had actually that's how Jake and I met. He was teaching at the school. He left the position to go be a worship pastor, but in his leave, he had upgraded them to an X32. And then he left the job and I was kind of left to figure it out, and to like implement it into our day-to-day rhythms as a school. So theater and, band class, things like that. And there were just not a lot of resources out back then. And so it was really hard to find out, okay, if I want to do this, and I didn't go to school for audio, like I had no experience routing digital audio, let alone analog audio of any kind. I just didn't know what I was doing really for that season. But I had time. So I was spending time, digesting your videos, spending time at the console going, if I do this, what happens? And so I think, there's what a privilege it is to have a culture now where there is a breadth of knowledge and people are sharing their experience. And hopefully you can still go to an audio school or you can go get, a 4-year degree or a certificate, but hopefully you don't need to do all of that to serve your church well or to run a fun, bad cover band for your high school. You can run audio well with the resources that are out there these days. So I just appreciate you sharing kind of the process through which you were navigating that. I want to ask you a follow-up question to that. When you had covered so much of the X32, what were your initial thoughts when they announced the wing? Like, I want to know, like, what did Drew
Yeah.
Brashler think when Behringer was like, hey, we've got this thing. It's completely different. It's totally different layout, totally different firmware, like different desk. What does Drew Brashler think?
Well, at that time, Behringer and I had a little bit more of a relationship, and I love the guys over at Behringer, and they sent me one of the units before it was out in market. So I received a wing, and I remember opening. This was right around the start of COVID. I
Yep.
remember looking through my phone, like, if I'm scrolling through, like, there's COVID. Oh, there's the first day that I had the wing, and, it it was pretty fun. But the wing and I have one just sitting right in front of me here too. The wing is a fantastic console in that it is the next step bigger for the churches that have found the limitation of channel count and processing power of the X32.
Yep.
The X32 is a fantastic console, and for most churches that are out there, it's a great option. And I'm not saying that Behringer is the only option out there. There's so many other consoles that are fantastic mixers, and find one that fits in your church's budget and that matches the channel count and the needs for your largest Sunday. So, an Easter or a
Hmm.
Christmas or that one band that's going to be coming in the summer and playing, and they're adding on, a bunch of guitars. Make sure that that channel count of that mixer matches. And so the wing gives you 48 channels, and those 48 channels can be set in a mono, a stereo, or a mid side. So technically, you could think of it as a 96 input console, but it's even more than that. It's just like the amount of processing that's in the wing is like 3 times as much processing that's in the X32.
Hmm.
So I was just ecstatic about all of the changes and all of the features and everything that Behringer has brought into the wing. They are constantly updating the firmware and releasing new things too. So when they originally released the console, it didn't have show control, so you couldn't save scenes. You could save scenes, but you couldn't recall really well, and you couldn't do like channel saving. And so now they have a new firmware 2.0 that allows you to save channel presets, save scenes. you can even recall audio files from a USB stick on the console. And
Yeah.
then there's the internal modules that they have. So you can put a Dante module inside the board and use the two ports that are on the back of the console for Ethernet to actually use it as your Dante connectivity. So
Isn't
not
that
only does it
crazy?
give you your Dante connectivity of primary and secondary, but you can also have all of your iPad apps and whatnot working through that same connection. And so for the churches that are out there that have Dante, it's a fantastic protocol. And so if you have a wing, you can just toss a Dante card on the inside of your wing and have Dante just on the same Ethernet port, which is awesome. So I mean, I could go on for hours, more than your listeners would want, talking about the Behringer wing and everything that it has. So I was very excited when they first announced it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a totally different desk, and the IO is incredible. And I think I wonder, I want to say, isn't it like something like 400 channel sources or input sources, across all of the IO that you could load the board up? You could have like around 400 sources coming in. Now it's a 48 channel mixer, so you got to pick which ones you're actually going to assign to channels on the board. But like the capability of that is just stupid. It's just like incredible the flexibility that you get at that scale. So yeah, it's crazy. I have a follow up question on the wing too for you. I want to know if you use the top right section, and if so, for what?
I don't.
I can't
Don't
figure
tell.
out. I can't figure out
Don't tell
something to use it
Behringer.
for. Yeah, yeah. We'll keep it on the
please,
DL.
please don't tell them. Please
I
don't tell
know
them.
it's got some customization. I get that. I
It
just
does.
everything is so and it actually is it's probably a pro, or it shows kind of the ease of use for the rest of the console that you
Yes.
might not need to
The
reach
touch
for some
screen
other section.
the touch screen is so good on it. And, obviously the X32, that's the one thing that's like missing is the touch screen.
Yeah.
Kind of like the LS9, or
Yeah.
no, what was it? Oh shoot, what's the Yamaha board that came before the QL? It is
This
the
it's not
LS9.
yeah, I think it is the LS9 because the
It is the
LS9 is still
LS9.
kind of
It
a
it
hybrid,
doesn't have a Yeah, and it doesn't have a touchscreen, and
right?
it's just like every time I get to that console, I just like I go to touch oh, it doesn't work, and so that's the one thing on the X32 that I wish was there was a touchscreen. But
Yeah.
when they put it in on the wing, it's like I mean the main things that I touch is just the touchscreen. You can do everything from that screen. So yeah, I don't touch the channel processing section on the upper right
Yeah.
ever. I'm always touching for the touchscreen.
I wonder if at some point, like, it would become, maybe like a module where you could view the channel processing on like an external monitor, if that would be more of a useful experience of, because it is flat. Like I don't think you can prop that part of the board up physically, but so it kind of does, it requires you kind of look over, the top down view, if you will. So I just wonder if like, maybe it's like a wave setup where you have another monitor that shows your channel processing, and you've got some user I don't know, UI that you can engage with a little bit, but that it's not limited to being on the desk, but it's some kind of a extension or something. But that's just random thoughts from having used it a little bit. So I was curious on
Yeah,
your
that'd be
experience with it.
cool.
Yep. Do you have anything that you feel like you wish was different with the wing? After you've done tutorials on that, any limitations for you that you come up against that you think, man, if there were future firmware iterations, or if you feel like there were different, even hardware pieces that you wish were different about the experience as you've done tutorials, or even just feedback from the community, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I would say the one thing that I really wish the Wing had in the snapshot recall was the ability of a crossfade.
Mm,
So, for instance, with the X32 and the Wing, if you recall a snapshot or a scene, there's multiple terms out there
right.
for all the different listeners on different consoles. If you recall that and you had a fader position move, it would instantly recall.
Right.
And so the tip for all you X32 users out there is if you are recalling snapshots in between songs, which is a great way of starting out your mix for like song one, song two, song three, song four. is recall it during the quiet moment in between the songs.
Mhm.
Otherwise you're gonna have that fader movement instantly recall. And so I would love to see a crossfade time in between those, being able to say like, I want a 3-second fade time for this fader to go from 0 to, infinity up to -5, for
Yeah.
instance. One of my favorite consoles is the Avid Venue series. So, like the Venue Profile, which is an old console, so good
Mhm.
though. Best knobs on a console, I'd have to say.
That's what
Like
I've
those
heard.
knobs just feel so good. But even the Avid S6L, both of those have some very good show control. And when sometimes when I'm mixing, for the churches that have multiple services in one day and maybe have Saturday services and Sunday services, which some of the mega churches out there have that. Saving those snapshots is one way of creating a consistent mix from service to service to service. If you come in on a Saturday and you mix one way, well, maybe your ears are a little bit tired when you come in Sunday morning. So maybe your mix is going to start in a slightly different spot than you would have if you saved some snapshots. So with those snapshot recalls, I have done like 40-second crossfade times of a build from a quiet part of a song going all the way up to, the loudest chorus. And instead of me sitting there and moving faders for 40 seconds, I'm just going to recall it because like the console's doing what I am asking it to do. And I want that to be the same fade for all, 5, 6 services that we have
Yeah.
at the church. So that is something that I really wish that the Wing and even more consoles had.
Yeah.
But like programming wise, it's incredibly difficult because for instance, where do you put the mute? Do you put
Yeah.
it at the end or do you hit it at the beginning? Or,
Yep.
so so that's a difficult one.
I think that would be a follow-up question too. I think I've been trying to figure out why more churches don't use snapshots and kind of recalls for songs because it's such a good live audio feature in these digital consoles to be able to save basically every configuration that you would want and then transition to a completely different configuration pretty seamlessly without having to manually go and change everything. Um, and so I've always wondered like what's the roadblock for churches? And I do think it's that programming time. I mean, I think it's one, people don't really know where to even start and what's a global safe versus a scene safe versus a recall safe. And like that language can get a little bit muddy, console to console, or even if you just are unfamiliar with those pieces of language in a console. What would be, if somebody wants to dive into it, do you have any tips about like where you would recommend starting for success if you want to use, we'll call them, scenes for now, but we're talking show or song to song transitions where you might be changing some of those parameters. Any tips for success there?
Yeah. So on the X32 and on the Wing, there's this thing called snippets. So check it out. Just search up snippets on Google. You'll find one of my videos on it.
Hmm.
And it allows you to specifically choose the channels that you want to adjust. And then you can choose the parameters for those channels that you want to adjust. The Wing takes it even farther than the X32 did. So the functionality that they're putting in the Wing is a lot better than the functionality that's in the X32, and the X32 is pretty good. But snippets, you can go and select a fader and a mute and then go and select all of your channels, all of your DCAs if you're using them, and start out with your base mix. So
Hmm.
in soundcheck, go through, have all of your musicians check their volume at the loudest portion of the service. And this is key for anyone that's checking gain and preamp gain on any console out there. Ask your musician, hey, what's the loudest patch or what's the loudest pedal or what's the loudest thing that you're going to be playing during this service or show? I want you to go there. And electric guitar players love it because they're just like, oh, yeah, let me go to 11. And but that allows you to set your preamp gain correctly. And so then
Hmm.
you set that to a nominal gain. Most mixers happen to be in that like -18, -20 dB down from clip. And so metering on consoles is all different. Some still use VU. Most of the Behringer products use dBFS, so dB full scale. So 0 dBFS is clipping, and so -20 or -18 dBFS is going to be that nominal gain. And so getting that gain up to that point is going to be key. And so then once you do that on all your channels, then you say, "Sweet band, go practice." And then build yourself your mix that you're like, "Man, this sounds awesome." Save that as a snippet. So that has all of your faders and your mutes for all the channels that are on your board in your mix that you're using. And then when they go and rehearse song 1, go find your fader positions for the start of that song and then go save that as another snippet. And then song 2 comes around and maybe this one is quieter. Okay. So I'm going to bring the faders down. This is maybe a keys and acoustic led song. So I'm going to push those guys up in the mix and not have much bass guitar or drums, etc. And I'm going to start off the song that way. And maybe song 3 is like straight in your face, bass, drums, guitar, just up there. And so that's going to be a different snapshot or snippet in this case. And so then when you are actually in show, then you can recall those snippets and the things that you decided was the channels, your DCAs, and your fader or mute. And those are the only things that are going to be loaded. So all of your EQ, all of your dynamics, all of your gates, all of that is going to stay untouched as you're loading
Mhm.
these snippets. So that's really the way that I would be approaching mixing on a church if you're having multiple services, or even if you just have one.
Mhm.
Just being able to recall your faders just makes it so much easier for you to be creative in that moment.
Yeah. And you don't have to recall a whole new scene, right? You can recall
Right.
just the snippet of those specific parameters, which I think a lot of people get tied up in the scene and they feel like they have to build a whole new scene. And so it's probably a little bit more nuanced than that where they don't have to. They can just lean on the snippets both on the X32 and the Wing, correct?
Yes, exactly. And so when I think of the scene, I'm thinking of this is this band, or this is this service, or this is this event. And if
Mhm.
there's a massive change, so like if you're changing guitar players, if you're changing complete inputs, for instance, if it's a separate drummer, or if
Mhm.
it's a separate drum set, or a different acoustic guitar, you can save some of that stuff in snippets, but it's easier to think of it as a scene because it's a global change. So,
Yeah.
if you had a traditional service, that is one setup. So that is one scene for me. There's 4 songs in that traditional service. And then the contemporary service comes around for second service. That's a completely different setup. You have different musicians, you have different inputs. So that's where I would be reaching for a scene. And then you have 4 songs. So that would be the snippets.
Yeah, that's super helpful. I think it'll kind of give light bulbs to some of the listeners and viewers out there. Um, Another practical question I have for you that I'm kind of discerning this myself in my own mixing experience, but I would be curious to know your opinion on using the mutes of your DCAs versus using mute groups. Pros and cons, things to consider.
I haven't used a mute group since DCAs came out.
Mm, it's a good answer.
So there's the mic drop moment. I
Yeah.
I always control all of my channels with DCAs.
Mhm.
And the reason I do it is most mixers have at least 8. Behringer X32 has 8. The Behringer Wing has 16, which is just nuts. Oh, and the other thing that I love about Behringer is they put an estimated metering on the DCAs.
Oh, interesting.
And so the DCAs, obviously, they don't sum. You're not taking
Right.
multiple channels and summing them together with a DCA. It's just a remote control to the inputs that are associated with that DCA. And but Behringer puts metering on that DCA. So you can see if your acoustic guitar player is playing in this song, which is a really important thing to know, especially if you're pretty far away and maybe that acoustic player is just like plucking a couple strings and
Mhm.
maybe you have him turned down in the mix and you're like, "Oh, wait, I can boost him."
Right.
And so anyway, metering is important. But with the way that I use DCAs is I have a drum DCA, a bass DCA, guitar, keys, tracks, and then sometimes I'll have a second electric if I need it, or an acoustic if I need it. And then I have my vocals and then my band, the entire band. So not only are my drums associated on DCA 1, but they're also associated on the band DCA, which is DCA 8. And so at the beginning of my sound checks or the beginning of my songs, I set everything at 0 on my DCAs, and then I will mix on the left side of the board and create my mix. Now I have a baseline of what my mix is. And if there's a specific song that is keys led and not electric guitar led, then I'll be reaching for the DCAs and I'll boost the keys up and pull the DCA of the electric guitars down. And now, when it comes to the main chorus of that song, when it is even across the board of everyone providing musical notes into that song, then I can just push that all back to 0. And there's my baseline of what my mix was. And so that's the way that I end up using DCAs. But then also, if you mute the DCA, it mutes that group of channels that's associated with that DCA. And so I've always ended up just using the DCAs for my mutes, even when it was VCAs on analog consoles or voltage controlled amplifiers. I was still using those rather than mute groups. The mute groups on the X32, I don't. I always worry about the placement of them because it's like the bottom right hand side, right next to the phone holder, which I've never
Uh-huh.
used. And but I've seen people accidentally bump one of those buttons.
Mhm.
And if that bottom button on the right-hand side is all of your inputs and you bump that, well, boom, that's a big distraction during the middle of your service.
I always think of mute groups more for the theater folks. You know, these digital consoles are
Yes.
amazing and they are used not only in churches but also in theaters or even in live venues where there's multiple, maybe there's like two or three acts of, you know, openers and headliners, things like that. And I could see mute groups being really helpful if you're going from scene to scene in a theater play and you've got a bunch of different mics that you need to mute or unmute at once that people are transitioning off or changing mics. But to me, for the church world, I rely on the DCAs more, but I always feel like, am I missing something here? Am I missing something by not using mute groups? Because I feel like, man, it's there. Like I should be using it to do something, but I just can't wrap my head around, you know, not using DCAs for that feature.
Yeah. I mean, theater guys are just nuts. I mean, the amount of open headsets or lavs or like hair mics that they
Yeah.
have to deal with is just crazy to me. But if you're using snapshot automation for that, you could, scene by scene, vary the DCA that those inputs were associated with. So you
Yeah.
could end up having your main talent, your background talents, and maybe the chorus line on 3 DCAs. And just in between those scenes and those cues, you're just changing the associated DCA for that band or that theater show. For instance, if there was one mega church I was working at that would have a different lead vocalist for every song.
Okay.
And how do you have a background vocal DCA and a main vocal DCA when there's 12 different singers that
Right.
all have a lead vocal moment? And so, you know, um, that was one fun thing of, especially if you have if you're using subgroups, if you're
Mhm.
utilizing subgroups, you have to change the routing and the automation of your subgroups. If you have to change the routing and the automation of your subgroups if you have singers that are lead vocal and then on the next 4 songs are background vocals, and you might want to process those background vocals slightly differently than your lead vocal, and so you kind of have to move those people around. So that's another use of automation. And I love watching the theater guys go because they're just going at it.
Yeah, and they load up things like snippets like crazy. I mean, they're really their cue sheet is scratched up and marked up, and they've got notes on every transition to make sure it's all a smooth process. I think we can learn a lot from that environment and from that industry in for the church world because of how um, I guess like they're intentional with how they're using those features to make sure there's no distractions during the show, right? Like I think there's a huge opportunity for church folks to kind of learn some of the more practical application of some of those snippets and features of scenes and cues and for a church environment. So it's just fun to think about the opportunity that's there these days with it, and so I could geek out on that stuff all day as well. I want to know what is in the pipeline for Drew and your channel. Like, what are you excited for? And are you working on anything specific right now that listeners should be keeping their eyes on for, or are you focusing specifically on wing stuff? I've seen a lot of waves content from you recently, so there's tons of waves integration there as well. So what are you excited for in this next season of your channel and for your resources?
I love teaching things. And so anytime I can get a piece of gear that I can teach something practical on that makes someone's life easier for being able to use that piece of gear, or maybe doesn't have the time to dig in to figure out, how do I use this
Mhm.
thing with this specific use case? If I can make a video that's like 10 minutes long that you can just watch instead of digging in on it yourself, then that helps you, or that puts you on a journey for digging into that product. That's the type of stuff that I love to do. So I would love to do more consoles than just Behringer. I am starting to do some stuff on PreSonus, and I just bought a Yamaha little DM3D,
Yeah.
little
Hmm.
guy. That thing looks awesome.
Yeah.
Man, I mean, I would just love to partner with other manufacturers that wanna send me a console so I can teach some stuff on it. It's hard wanting to do training videos on all these consoles when I have to be the one that buys it,
Right.
you know? It's not like I have a mass amount of money coming in that I can just go buy
Right.
all these consoles.
Or a need like
You know?
you're not touring with rigs, and so you're really just looking to teach how to use and then return or send back or have as reference, and it's like you don't really need to buy one to, oh, I just want to put it up on my shelf of consoles in my office. It'd be
I
weird.
do have a lot of consoles. And then there's a whole lot more Waves integration with all the mixers that are out there, like the release of Waves Super Rack Performer, being able to
Yeah.
utilize the I/O of your console and your computer for being able to insert Waves plugins on any of your channels. That's really cool.
Crazy.
And so there's a lot of plugins that I love using. Anytime that I'm mixing in a broadcast situation, there are specific plugins that I'm always going to be using because it's a tool.
Yeah.
And I feel like there's a lot of people that look at plugins and they're like, "Oh, those plugin guys, they're just crazy." And there are some people that can go a little bit nuts
Yep.
on plugin usage. But also, if you're using it for a specific tool, for instance, loudness, the Waves L2 is a limiting plugin that can help you bring up your level of your audio to that streaming level. And so that's a tool that I utilize in that case. And I want to be able to teach about that. Or for
Hmm.
instance, the Waves C6, which is this multi-band compressor from Waves. That thing is awesome on vocals. And it's also pretty complicated.
Yeah.
If you want to dive in and make it complicated, it can be. But it's also, there's some really good things that you can do with it. Same thing with the Waves F6. So all of those plugins, I really want to be able to spend some time digging in on all of those. But it's again just time, man. I wish I had more time to be able to be in here and recording. It's just it's tough. It's tough. I got 3 kids. They're all teenagers. My wife, we got 2 dogs, and I mean, we all need to have a life outside of what we're doing for our work, you
Yeah.
know, have some hobbies, spend some time at home. And if you're not in that work life balance, that you are being able to spend time digging in with your family or digging in with your hobbies or digging in with your personal ventures, like you need to find that time. You need to
Mhm.
find that time because if you're only thinking about work, 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 that's a really bad spot to be. And you can easily get burnt out. And I see a lot of production guys in mega churches just going down that path of, man, I got to do this next big thing. I got to do this next big thing. I got to do this next big thing. And then all of a sudden it's Easter. And then it's this vicious cycle. Oh, now it's Christmas. Oh, now it's Easter again. And it's like, well, did you spend any time on yourself? Did you spend
Yeah.
any time with your family? So anyway, that was slightly a side tangent, but it's important. It's very important to find that work-life balance. But
Mhm.
yeah, so finding more time to make more videos is something that I
Yeah.
would love to do.
It's hard when your hobbies become what you're paid to do or your vocation, right? Because I'm sure a lot of us tech guys and audio guys, we grew up nerding out about stuff and we like to engage in that environment, tinker with electronics, mix audio, uh, dink around with new gear, like just, trying things out. It is our hobby for a long time. Then we get into the industry and we feel like, oh, we could actually make a living with this at some level. And then it becomes our hobby is our vocation. And there's not as much, there's a grayer and grayer line between that, I would call like work life balance, if you will. And so any tips that you've found over the years? You've been in the industry a while, you've worked at a lot of churches, you're doing the freelance thing now with YouTube. And so what's any tips for people who are in the industry of ways to kind of, take care of yourself in that regard and still be passionate about what you love to do?
Yeah, train people.
Hmm.
Train the team that's around you. Recruit volunteers. The volunteer thing is definitely a topic that is difficult for a lot of smaller churches. Trying to keep the booth full of people Sunday to Sunday to Sunday is difficult. And you have to balance the amount of tech that your church wants and needs with the coolest stuff that's out there. When a church goes and adds an iMag feed in room. So you have video that's close up of your speaker on stage and you put that on the projection screens on um in the room. That's called iMag. You have to have multiple cameras. So you have to have multiple people to run those cameras and you have to have a video switcher and you have to have a person that directs that video cut or programs that switcher. And so all of a sudden you can go from just a single camera in the back of the room with one person to needing five people all of a sudden. And if your church is wanting that, that's fine, but you have to have the support system behind it or else who's going to be the person that's overworked, and it's
Yeah.
the production guy. And
Mm.
so as a production person in the church, it's your responsibility to help your leaders and administrative staff understand the I wouldn't say ramifications because I feel like that's such a negative word, but I would say impact that it has on people as well as the positive or negative impact that it has on your service. So, I mean, obviously there's some really cool production toys that are out there that we can add that really makes a difference. For instance, auto tune on vocals. I mean, if you're streaming and you have a big following on stream, it's very easy to hear an out of tune vocal on an online stream.
Mhm.
And it's a little bit more difficult to hear that out of tune vocal in room. And that's because just the way that acoustics work in the room, you might think that your band is just crushing it and everything's on key and everything is like that. And then you go and listen to the YouTube stream from Sunday and you're like, oh, wow, I did not hear those sour notes. Autotune is a great way of helping that for your online stream. But the ramifications of autotune is what keys are you singing in on Sunday? And so who's organizing those keys? Do you have a music director? Do you have a person is the worship pastor planning those keys? And if there is a key change on a Sunday, who's communicating that? Because all of a sudden your online stream is completely out of key. It's tuned perfectly, but tuned perfectly out of key. So those are two examples of some tech that you can add in your church, but it has personnel things that happen. And so we come back to the original question of like how can I as a production person in my church find extra time for me to have that work life balance? And that's training and bringing up those who are around you. And volunteers will flock to people who care about people. And I feel like that's the case with anything. People are always going to flock to people who care about other people. And so if you can create a culture of people that care about the other people that are in your tech booth, that are in your backstage area, that are on stage singing, if you can create a culture that cares about people, that's praying for people, that's asking like, "Hey man, you want to go hang out after rehearsal? We're all going to go grab some coffee." Those are that culture is important because once people start seeing that culture, they want to be a part of it. And so for those production people and even the worship leaders that are out there, if you can start training the people that are around you that are newer to your craft than you are, if you can train a person how to play acoustic guitar, and then all of a sudden you don't have to play acoustic guitar and you can have that high schooler up on stage or that college student on stage playing that acoustic guitar, and now you can be just focusing on worship and leading your congregation. That's a big, big thing. Or on the tech side, if you're the main production person, if you can train someone how to run the soundboard for the service, maybe you have them sit next to you while you're adjusting gains, setting preamp level, the technical stuff. But then when it's actually time for service, we're not really reaching for those knobs very often, unless something is going pretty bad, pretty
Mhm.
wrong. We're just moving faders, and you can teach someone that loves music how to move faders. And the minute that you now have a person on that soundboard that you've trained up, that you've taught them the sound of your church and the sound that you're trying to go for, then now all of a sudden you can be walking around checking on youth rooms. You can be checking on extra rooms. Maybe your speakers are blown in your foyer from sending too much 80 and 60 hertz to it and you didn't even know. But if you're walking around your building during service, all of a sudden now, oh wow, that speaker is blown. i'm
Yeah.
i'm going to need to fix that. And so that's what I would say is training up the people that are around you, having them be a part of a team, creating that culture. And that's how you're going to gain work life balance back, is by delegating.
That's going to be gold. And I think a lot of light bulbs for a lot of folks listening. I'm really grateful for your insight there. I have one final question as we wrap our time. And I'm so grateful for the value that you've brought already to our audience. I think this question um, could be helpful to our listeners. You mentioned at the top of the episode that you've done some consulting. You kind of travel around and kind of help churches out and assess what's going on and how, where they could be missing the mark at some level. What are your findings? If you can kind of think in a large umbrella of the churches you visited, what are the most common things that you're finding that our listeners could maybe get a jump start on to like, don't miss this. You've seen many churches, you've assessed many situations, consulted and found solutions for people. What are most churches these days either forgetting, missing in their kind of setup and procedures and the fundamentals, or in large like execution of their mixing and their use of audio? Anything come to mind there from that question?
Absolutely. I got a couple things. One of my favorites, I just recorded a video of this and I'm excited to share it in a bit. But I have this direct box and I feel bad. I'm just going to cover up the name so no one sees it. But this direct box, and I'm holding it, and it is the cheapest direct box that I could find on Amazon. It was $18.
Wow.
Fantastic deal. Okay. And a direct box takes a unbalanced signal and converts it into a balanced signal so you can send it a really long distance. So for a keyboard or a bass guitar or electric guitar, anything that's instrument level or even an amp, you can plug an amp through a direct box. Anything that you're sending longer than 15 feet. If you're sending an instrument cable longer than 15 feet, noise from power supplies, noise from DMX lighting, noise from anything can get into that signal and degrade it. And so now all of a sudden, when you turn up that acoustic guitar, well, you're hearing this bzzz, this maybe not a ground loop, maybe it's just a power supply noise. And by using a direct box, it makes it balanced, which gives a lot better rejection for noise. And so by putting in a direct box, and then we can send it really far distances on that XLR because it's converting that impedance to a lower impedance that our mixer receives on an XLR. A little bit of engineering for you. The problem with buying cheap direct boxes is that they don't sound good.
Right.
And so what's fun is I did some testing on this direct box, and if you happen to plug a high impedance instrument into this direct box, and a high impedance instrument would be like an acoustic guitar, a bass guitar, some keyboards have a high impedance output. If you plug a high impedance input into this, and the impedance of a like an active bass is up in the million ohms, and the pickups that are in that instrument want to see that impedance. And if you plug it into a direct box that is, say, 50,000 ohms, it's going to change the tonality of that instrument. And so one thing that this direct box happens to do is it reduces the low end by 30 decibels.
Wow.
There's a roll off, and down at 30 hertz, it's down by about 30 dB down. And so I ended up taking it into Smart and doing some testing on this. And so $18 for this direct box. And I've gone into churches and they had a Nord, beautiful piano, beautiful keyboard, sounds fantastic. They had it plugged into an $18 direct box. And it was plugged into a Behringer X32. And I'm like, when I walked in, I'm like, that doesn't sound correct
Mhm.
because I know what a Nord sounds like, and they sound great. And so I just grabbed my personal direct box out of my work box that I always carry with me. And I went up and I swapped out the direct box. And all of a sudden, boom, there's all this beautiful low end. And unfortunately, when we are purchasing stuff, we try to find the cheapest thing out there. And that's not always the best thing to do. On the flip side, sometimes we want to spend too much money. And again, that's not the best thing to do. There was one church that well, I'll get to that in a second. But with this direct box, if they spent $60 on a direct box or $100 on a direct box, for instance, Radial makes really great direct boxes. They have this series called the Stage Bug, and they
Yeah.
sound great. And they're about $100, and they're fantastic. And so when I took that into Smart, it was completely flat, the entire thing, and it sounds awesome. And then when I take this $18 direct box into Smart, it's just like there is zero low end, and it starts rolling off about like 2K, 2000
Wow.
hertz
Holy
all the
cow.
way down. That was a big thing. And so verifying that your gear works the way it should is something that's key. But then also, there are some churches that have spent a lot of money on products for various reasons, but didn't upgrade everything. So I went into this one church that had an SSL console. And I mean, we're talking 6-digit console.
Wow. Yeah.
SSL digital console, 6 digits, very expensive. Very, very flexible console. It can do everything and it sounds
Everything.
fantastic. It can do everything. Like, I don't know why, but the compressor, like, you just can't hear the compression on an SSL console. I don't know what it is about it. Like, I don't know what wizardry they're doing, but you can't hear it. It's amazing. The speaker system was older than me. And I mean, I was born in the 80s. And so the speaker system was no name branded. It had separate horns from mid-range drivers, like different things. And then the amps, like they weren't even like legit amps either. And so they're putting the six digit audio digital console in at front of house, but not upgrading the one thing that actually reproduces all of the audio for your congregation to hear.
Yeah.
And that was a miss. That was a miss. You
Yeah.
could spend 6 digits on a audio system and put a Radio Shack mixer in there, and it sounds awesome. But if you
Yeah.
put a 6 digit console in there and have really terrible speakers, your limitation is that speaker system. So you
Mhm.
can have this gold polished mix before your speakers, and it will sound awful because of your speakers. So spending the right money in the right spots is always going to be important. And this is one thing that I see a lot of churches doing is they upgrade things, but they don't upgrade the right things. And so
Mhm.
finding an integrator, an AV integrator that really you can trust and that you can explain to them what your goals are and what your budget is, that AV integrator can work with you and help you purchase the correct things for your church and
Mhm.
for the specific use that you're trying to use those things for.
And really thinking through the big picture, right? Because oftentimes,
Yes.
like a church will upgrade a portion or a little segment, but they don't recognize the domino effect that that would have across the board or the impact it would have negatively, potentially. But integrators tend to have kind of will step back and kind of look at the big picture as a whole and look at goals and say what do we want to accomplish here? What's really the end goal for this church and these upgrades, and then we can step it out. We can reverse engineer the steps that are needed to get there in the right order too. Upgrading a console before you assess PA is quite the step, right? Like you said, it's quite the miss. Um, so I appreciate your insight there. If people want, they can reach out to Churchfront. We are an integration company now, and so we are having a lot of these conversations with churches. Whether you're a church of 50 people or whether you're a church of 1,000 people, like we're having conversations across the spectrum these days in terms of size and scope of project, and making sure that we're not having any misses there. In terms of where you're allocating your time and investments for these upgrades. So I appreciate you just sharing some of that insight. I think it will be a value and helpful mindset for listeners and viewers to just add to their tool belt when they go online to Amazon. They're looking at these products that have great deals, and maybe they need to, take a step back and assess, what the actual best next step is for their purchasing decisions. So thank you for that, Drew. You're going to be at
Absolutely.
church.
I'd also say that for some of your listeners, they're going to be thinking, well, how do I know if something doesn't sound right?
Yeah.
I mean, I've been brought up in this church forever. I think it sounds fine. And so my suggestion is to buy a good set of headphones. Audio Technica makes some great reference headphones that are about 150 bucks. Go buy a good set of headphones and find some music that you love to listen to. Find some music that has really good high end, really good mid range, really good low end, maybe something that's not super processed, and go listen to those tracks. Know those tracks. I mean, I have a specific playlist that I use when I tune a system, and I've listened to those songs hundreds of times. And I know the way that the vocal sounds on X track.
Hmm.
Or I know that Billie Jean from Michael Jackson,
Yep.
if you have too much subwoofer, when that low end comes in from the bass, it's just going to be way overpowering for the rest of the mix. And so listening to those tracks and understanding what they sound like with true reference headphones, then take those same tracks, walk into the next venue that you're mixing in or the next church that you're mixing in or your church at home,
Hmm.
play those same tracks through that PA at level of your service. So at concert level, what are you noticing sounds different in that room in comparison to what you're listening to when on your reference headphones? And that's a very good indication of being able to find trouble issues. Maybe your PA doesn't have any high end. Maybe it has too much low end. Maybe there's some speaker components that are broken. And so that's That's how you can find those things, is just by using your ears. And then you can reach out to integrator partners, for instance, Churchfront, and say, "Hey, this is not sounding right. Can you come check this out?" And then they can set up an appointment with you or another system integrator. It doesn't have to be Churchfront.
Yeah.
Someone that understands those systems better than you do, have them come out, listen, and be like, "Yeah, you are correct. That speaker is blown. We need to get you a new one." Listening to music and then listening to that same music in your room is important.
Yeah, it's super insightful and also minimal investment too, right? Headphones, I mean, $150 could be a big swing for some folks, but I promise you that, if you have a streaming service or if you listen Apple Music or you could do Tidal for the high quality, you could do Spotify just as a reference, just to know different headphones or different sets of speakers, your reference tracks. Like, it's such a low cost investment to really discern whether or not you need to drop multiple thousands of dollars on a new PA. So I think the 150 up front for a set of headphones and maybe a $10 a month streaming service would be well worth the investment if you could repurpose the speakers, fix the speakers, service the speakers, or if you really do need to allocate some funds. So such a good tip to the listeners. And if you guys want more from Drew is going to be at Churchfront Conference this year, 2024, right? You're coming out to hang with us. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I'm so excited. I'm so
It'll be a
excited.
great
I can't
time.
wait.
It'll be a great time. So if you have questions for Drew, leave them in the comments of this video and, shoot us a note and let us know what you'd love to hear from Drew. And I can't promise that he's going to use it for his talk, but Drew's going to be one of our keynote speakers at Churchfront Conference in October of 2024. If you haven't checked it out yet, go to churchfront.com/conference, and you can still use the discount code. As of recording this episode, you can use a discount code EARLYBIRD to save 30% off of your tickets. So come on out, hang with Drew and a ton of other amazing speakers and guests and the Churchfront team. Network with other folks who are in the production and worship industry, rub shoulders with pastors and leaders, and especially experts in the field. Like our conference is not the type where we send Drew back to the green room. In fact, there is no green room. So he's not going to be eating his blue M&Ms back there in between sessions. Like, you can come hang out with the crew who's going to be on stage and speaking and doing breakouts. So really encourage you guys to come check that out. And we'll have a link in the description for you to pick up your tickets. Drew, if they want to follow along with you, tell them your YouTube channel, any other websites or places they want to keep up with your resources as they come.
Yeah, it's Drew Brashler. And that's my YouTube channel and my website. So www.drewb as in boy, RASHLER.com.
Well, I appreciate your time, Drew. It's been a pleasure to meet you. It's an honor of mine just to be able to sit down and have a conversation with you as somebody who's found a ton of value from your resources over the years, and really your channel was a comfort when I didn't know what I was doing. So I appreciate just your time for me in my story. I appreciate your time for what I know a ton of our listeners and audience will feel the same. And so thanks for making time to be on the podcast. And I can't wait to hang out with you in person in October.
I can't wait. Thank you so much.